So good evening, everyone. It's so wonderful to see you all here tonight. I see some stragglers coming in, which makes my heart beat faster. It's lovely to see so many of you coming here tonight. My name is Tricia Paik, Curator of Contemporary Art here at the IMA, and over my one-year anniversary, it's gone by really quickly. Oh, that's so nice. Heart beating faster than that. So we have a lot to talk about tonight. So welcome. Thank you so much for coming out to see the great Richard Wentworth. I'm so pleased to see such a great turnout tonight. I do hope that some of you did get to see Richard Wentworth's installation, False Ceiling, Indianapolis, as you walked into the Ephraimson Family Entrance Pavilion. If you walk through the garage, make sure that you get to see the installation as you depart after the conversation. And of course, False Ceiling, Indianapolis is the reason why we are here tonight to celebrate that extraordinary installation. I am so overjoyed, and it's always so much better for a curator or whatever you're working on when the project exceeds your expectations even more than what you had thought it would originally be. So I am truly, truly overjoyed. So before we start our program, which will be about 40 to 45 minutes long, I want to let you know that immediately after this conversation, we are going to be having a brief annual meeting for the Contemporary Art Society, which is the membership group here at the IMA committed to contemporary art in furthering the education of people about contemporary art, the love of contemporary art, and also the commitment to helping acquisitions here at the IMA. And we invite you to stay here. It'll be a very brief meeting where we'll talk a little bit about what we do in CIS, and also we're going to elect our new board members this year. If you are a fan of Art of the Matter, whether on radio or on public television, you will know our local celebrity, Travis DiNicola. He'll be presiding over the meeting with our outgoing president, Anne Serac. Travis is our current vice president, and if all CS members agree not to vote him out, he should be elected as president tonight. So hopefully there won't be any overthrow of Travis. And also, before I introduce you all to Richard Wentworth, I wanted to share a few words of thanks to people who helped make False Ceiling Indianapolis possible. With a project of that scale, it is necessary for me to give thanks because I will leave this conversation very sad if I can't give my thanks, so please do bear with me. So first of all, I have to give a heartfelt thanks to Richard for his willingness to come and work with us and flying all the way out here from London 2 times and exploring how we could make his work literally on 2 levels in our Ephraimson Family Entrance Pavilion. It's been such a pleasure working with you and with your great studio team, Felix Wentworth, who is indeed Richard's younger son, and Joey Williamson. The 2 of them together were so fantastic to work with, and I want to thank you so much for your collaboration. I also want to thank Richard's American Gallery, Peter Freeman Inc., and their director, Katie Rashid, who is here tonight, who flew in to join us, and of course, along with Richard's wife, Jane Wentworth, who he flew in also. She was already doing her own museum consulting business, but I think she decided she would come and perhaps support her husband in this project. And internally, I want to thank our director, Charles Venable, deputy directors Preston Bautista and Katie Haig for all their support in making this possible. And of course, there were so many people who spent countless hours on this project. You know who you are, but I'm going to take a moment and be like at the Oscars and have the music running out. And I just wanted to call out a few people, or several people, who really made this project happen. As you study the installation, you're going to see that it was a great engineering success of creating this hanging grid that would then support, I don't even know the weight. Mike Burr, what's the weight of the books? Okay, 1,500 pounds. We have to make sure that these books are safe and secure and hanging properly. And so Mike Burr, of course, is the first on the top of the list. Phil Lynham, Mike Griffey, Claire Havel, Angie Day, Andy Stewart, Mark Anderson, Grant Keeney, and my new great assistant, Elizabeth Smith. I want to thank you all so much And plus the great student volunteers from Heron. We had about 10 sculpture students who volunteered on the project, and I hope you will leave forever remembering this installation and the experience to work with Richard and his team. And of course, all of this is coordinated by sculpture professor Greg Hull, and somewhat to a certain extent with Eric Nordland, who's on sabbatical, but he helped too. And of course, I must thank Lori Ephraimson Aguilera and Sergio Aguilera for their continued and generous support through the Ephraimson Contemporary Art Fund, which is an endowed fund established in 2006 by the Ephraimson Family Fund to support work by emerging and established local, national, and international contemporary artists through a rotating installation program in the Ephraimson Family Entrance Pavilion. So thank you so much to Lori and Sergio. Okay, music has definitely run out, but I have two more thank yous. One, of course, is to Indy Reads Books, and again, Travis DiNicola, who, when he found out about this project, said we want to be involved. And what we did was we did a collaboration with a book drive where we had people donate books here at the IMA and also Indy Reads Books, and we had our volunteers here, Michelle Ritter and Chris St. Paul, go through all the books, along with Claire Havel, our senior conservator of paper. And then we had a great team of volunteers at Indy Reads Books who processed all the books to make sure there was no mold or bugs or anything that would cause damage to any works of art in the museum. You don't know what we all do behind these closed doors. And lastly, and of course, Jenny Dwenger, thank you so much for coordinating this. I do really feel like I'm won an award. And lastly, my last thank you is to all of you, because I hope many of you potentially did donate books to the project, and we could not have done the project without your generous donations. So thank you very much to all of you. I have to clap for you guys. And now it's time for Richard, and I want to introduce him. He's an exceptional artist with such a great poetic mind, not only in his art, but also he can turn words into magic, as you will soon see. In the 1970s, Richard Wentworth emerged as a key figure of the new British sculpture movement, and today is one of the foremost art educators in England, shaping countless artistic generations over the decades, while teaching for many years at Goldsmiths College, University of London, and then at Oxford University. And in 2009, he became professor and head of the Royal College of Art Sculpture Department in London. And for all of this, his great prestige and his great accomplishment, he was appointed in 2011 the Commander of the Order of the British Empire, CBE. And I can see Richard with his hand over his head, and he's getting really mortified because he's a man of great humility, but I have to brag about why I'm so thrilled he is here tonight. He is shown in solo exhibitions at the Whitechapel Gallery in London, Tate Liverpool, Bonner Kunstverein, Serpentine Gallery, and many, many other institutions. He has been featured in the 2003 and 2009 Venice Biennale, as well as the São Paulo Biennial in 2002. And just a short list of where his works belongs in international collections: Tate Britain, London, Auckland City Art Gallery, New Zealand, Irish Museum of Modern Art, Dublin, the Yorkshire Sculpture Park, RISD, the museum at RISD, then the Istanbul Museum of Modern Art. Wentworth has often been described as an alchemist of everyday things, transforming mundane or familiar matter into visual poetry. And for those of you who already seen the installation, I think you know what I mean. And to further that point, you can see that he has turned hundreds and hundreds of books into this magical false ceiling that just suspends right above you in our light-filled Ephraimson Family Entrance Pavilion. So before I welcome, finally, Richard on stage, I have a fun treat to share with you all, which is our time-lapse video that our great videographer on staff, Daniel Byer, put together, which will show literally how Richard and his team turned familiar matter books into great magic. So roll the time-lapse video, which is debuting right now. So finally, without further ado, let's give a warm indie welcome to Richard Wentworth. So I am so thrilled to be here with Richard. Finally, it's been a long road. Just a little introduction before we talk about the work and other aspects of your work. I had the great accidental opportunity, as you were happy to hear, to see a similar work he had installed as a permanent commission in Istanbul. Thank you, Richard, at the Istanbul Museum of Modern Art in 2012. And while I'd known your work for a while, I didn't know that you had done large-scale installations, and I must admit I wasn't aware of this project and was just blown away when I saw it. And then, thankfully, our director, Charles Venable, had already seen it, so I didn't have to convince him that I wanted to do it, because he said, go ahead. And so we're here.
Can I go?
So it's wonderful to see you, and I thought we would just start from the beginning and talk about, and so what we're showing here are a series of works that Richard's made in the past, and then you'll see book installations, and then you'll see pictures of the installation. So I thought we'd just begin from the beginning, and why the book?
Well, actually, you can test it because you can look around you and you can nominate the material around you, and you can say what things are made of. And some of you will be very good at it, some of you not so good. But the funny thing is that in a very short time, you'll stop saying cotton or DNA or glass or steel, or, as you guys say, aluminum, but I say aluminium. And you'll start naming, things will start to actually be cultural objects. So you'll start saying chair, glasses, person, shoe, building, possibly architecture. So actually these things aren't tidy. And I always think that the lists that you see after artworks are very funny. You can often tell what kind of artist made the work, because some artists are very punctilious in this way.
You mean the caption listing for the medium?
Yeah. Sometimes, of course, there are people working in museums who are even more keen on that. But I think it's an interesting thing about identity. So I think, it's pretty hard not to notice that there are these things in the world called books. The percentage that we've read or visited is very few. Most books we're disbarred from because they're not in our language. And I think it's hard to say, I'm not an artist that will want to kind of make fables and false epiphanies, but I do remember seeing some books for sale in how do I say this? Post-Berlin Wall, post-1989 Berlin, where books were being sold by weight. And it certainly, not only was it fun to buy books by weight, it made me really think about value and content and complexity. And I think artists are quite untidy. it would be too difficult. It would be too easy to say, I realize that books could be hung up in the sky and they would make shapes. It's a cumulative process, but they are very extraordinary things, and they're so extraordinary that we don't even notice them, which of course is how culture works. But we have to have something taken away to really notice. Turn off the lights, or get upset about the history of oil. Woo, we couldn't be here. We're the first people. Somebody said to me when I was a student, we're the first people to have got rid of the night.
That's very poignant.
I think it's true.
It's true. Well, maybe you can talk a little bit about how you made your first installation and how that led to what you did in Istanbul.
Well, actually, you've reminded me of something that happened. I think a lot of things I do are based in fear, but I think a lot of things that humans do are based in fear. It's you're frightened of something, so you do it. And silly young men sometimes put their lives at risk by doing that. So there's lots of things which I'm quite nervous of, and I will kind of take myself to the edge of doing. And they're completely private fears. They're not very conventional. And I was asked to make an exhibition in a very beautiful, nearly private picture gallery in a part of Oxford called, in fact, the college that you all know as Hogwarts. That's Christchurch. And this has a very beautiful picture gallery and a collection of mostly Florentine, Sienese, 14, 15, 1600 work. And I was really anxious about it because I'm fearful of academics, and I'm fearful of protocol or the smell of protocol. And I thought, how will I make an exhibition in a place like this? And then I noticed that it's a very typical thing you find in England, which is the desire to be modernist, but we can't be because we're not French. But there is lots of intelligence in England, and people understand the history of modernism, and actually perhaps it's because we're not German. And actually this building is very articulate spatially, and you can feel the intentions of the architects quite nice, nicely used to be a good word. Nicely means precise. And then I thought maybe I could, and this is probably a bit cheap to say, but I think it's true. I thought maybe I could measure all these dimensions in books. Oxford, get it? Books. And of course you can pile books up, and they have a volume. They have pages, and those pages then have covers, and they have a thickness. So I measured the gallery in all sorts of different ways in little piles of books. And actually I think it was a really beautiful work. And it was sort of named rather naughtily after, I never get this right, but I think it's in Pulp Fiction is it in Pulp Fiction where he talks about little differences? Somebody has to watch a lot of cinema, but anyway, there's a lovely discussion about little differences, and I think there's something about Europe, it's the little differences. Anyway, the title of the work was Little Differences because, of course, there are these little different increments. So I measured the steps. I measured the units of the space in books, but then I had the problem of how to keep them there. And then I had to drill a hole through the middle and put a plate on the bottom and a plate on the top to make them feel like I really meant it in a public place. And that was actually, I think, the first time I drilled a hole through a book. And then I thought, hey, it's easy.
I thought you said something very beautiful in your interview that was featured in the Indie Star today. We made front page above the fold, thanks to Richard. And you were talking about the book as its own architectural structure, and I thought maybe you could maybe recreate what you said in that interview, potentially.
Well, I never remember what I say, and so.
I'll help you a little bit.
But no, I mean, I know,
I think you know.
I know which sore spot you're pressing on, and I can do that. But no, I think, you know, I went to the Heron this morning, and the nice thing about going somewhere where there are a lot of young people who are, let's call it, let's just say they are near art, you know, they're near material, they're near stuff. And there's no knowing whether any of them is going to work out, and they know that, so they're kind of anxious, they're a bit fearful. But you could say that they're in a space which legitimates the idea that they could be artistic. So if you sort of pull away from the tidy categories that this is art, and that over there, that's called dance, this over here, that's called theatre, this is called opera, this is called design, this is called industrial design, this is called civil engineering. This is sort of came from the 19th century when we started to professionalize everything, and that's when the dentists stopped talking to the horticulturalists, and the horticulturalists stopped talking to the artists. And actually that diminishes how gorgeous humans can be, really. You want to know what other people get up to and why. And right in the middle of that is the invention of all the stuff we live with. I've never made a pair of trousers, but they're kind of miraculous that you call them pants. So things, all these things that have very long histories. You know, a good museum, you can feel these histories. So a bottle used to just be a sphere, because when you blow glass, it makes a sphere. And it took years for the sphere to become cylindrical. And I think Corbusier wrote about this. He said, you know, you won't make anything better than a wine bottle, which has got shoulders, and as you're pouring it, you can see if there's anything in there that's wrong. It's got that, you know, that's a piece of architecture. It's a piece of intelligent thought, and we just use bottles. We forget that. And I've always been very mindful of all of that, and I think I don't care that somebody wants to call it design. I think it's part of form making. So the book, you know, which is seriously old, is amazing. You know, look, just go home. Some of you are holding books. I mean, what a thing. And they're nice to carry. They might have no content at all. It might be a notebook. It has a nice language. Some of you might be bookbinders. You know, it has a thing called a spine. It's a really sophisticated object. And like a lot of other objects, we don't even really see it anymore.
I think I like your answer.
Phew.
Can you talk a bit about how you named first the Istanbul installation false ceiling, and how that term you were talking?
Well, false ceiling's quite old, because when I lived in Berlin for a while, and was during a period of turmoil in many senses. And the thing that was so striking about that time was that there were lots and lots of flea markets. There was lots of public expression of turmoil. There was no violence, but in a way, one was witnessing violence all the time, because people were selling the past. Maybe they weren't even selling the past, they were throwing out the past. And I think that happens in historical moments where people can't cope with the past, so they're looking for some sort of datum, some sort of new position to live from. So you go to a flea market and you would find Russian books, French books, Polish books, East German books, Czech books, Hungarian books, English books, all these people who'd been involved in this, and a lot of American books, in this turmoil that centered on Berlin, let us say, between the 20s and the 80s. That's a long time. And it was really visible. And I can't read German, or not well. So nearly everything was inaccessible to me. And the thing that was very strong was that there were a huge number of technical books. So there were East German technical books, which for all I know said exactly what the American technical books said in a different language with a different politic. So I was really struck by this force field, which of course, you know, a more intelligent person would just go to a library and you could see that anyway, but I have to see it on the street. And so when I came back, I made an exhibition in the Listen Gallery, which is a private commercial gallery, but has, at the time, had a very nice space. And I thought, I'm going to swear, so excuse me, but I thought, well, I can really fuck this space up. And I did, by making full ceiling initially in this space. And it's so long ago that my son was, I think Felix was 13 or something like that. So he was a little boy, well, young man. And I think that I mean, a lot of you are artists. I mean, and it doesn't really matter whether you call yourself an artist or not. A lot of what we do is sort of laboratory work. We just try something out. You know, you might take the dog for a walk and you take it in a new direction and you just discover the dog likes going that way and it's more interesting for you. So you're looking all the time for other ways of doing things because you don't want to go on being the same person. And I think making the first full ceiling in that space was actually very intimate. And, you know, I had 2 children helping. And some of you know that one of the nice things about art making is that it involves unusual moments of collaboration, the late night cold pizza, the anxiety that it won't be finished on time, very often being surrounded by quite neurotic people who, in this case, you are drilling the gallery's ceiling. Who is going to sort this out? You know, we had hundreds and hundreds of hooks right in the ceiling through the sheetrock. And that's very energizing, that kind of work. And I think it's the more interesting when you don't know what you're doing. It's a bit different if it's militarized and you know what you're doing and you're delivering product. And I think what's been good about this is that it's never felt that we were delivering product, because there are so many different things to deal with, very different circumstances of light, very different engineering things, and that space is spatially very, very unusual, where you've got 2 technologies which bring people in, a very old technology which brings you in the front, it's called a door, and then 2 moving technologies. You've got escalators, and you've got a very ambitious drum of light. So what I suppose I'm trying to say is that the more something is slightly frightening, the more fun it is to do. But you need to do, if you're being frightened, you want somebody to hold your hand. Thank you.
Are you surprised by anything? What's your top surprise of this particular installation that
Is this the first of the 4 questions?
No. We'll get to that in a little bit.
When are they coming?
I have some questions. Was there one top surprise that you like? The one?
I love the way that I would guess you can't be here by accident. So either you've made a terrible mistake and you've wasted your evening, or there's something about the subject matter that engages you. So you're very interested in books, or you're very interested in spatial, organizational, visual optical, retinal things. I mean, what does it mean? What does it mean to look at something and get meaning from it? It's pretty incredible. And you can test it, because animals can't do that. They do wonderful things, but hold a book up in front of a dog, it's not going to read. It's not going to happen. They're really smart, but they're not going to do that. But hold a book up in front of a child, and really within 18 months, they're probably already comprehending something about the right way. And you can test that. Some of you might be psychologists. You can test that with imagery. A baby will smile at the smiley face if you draw that on a piece of paper and show it, I think, to a 3-week-old baby. It'll smile. Turn it upside down. It doesn't smile. Well, there's a lot going on there. There's a lot of desire in there. What am I answering?
No, I was
What was the
asking
question?
I was wondering what your main surprise was with this installation, because I can share what mine is.
There was a reason for saying that, but the main surprise would be something to do with its physicality and the way it works in the space. So what humans do is that they propel themselves through the world almost without knowing they do it. There's this thing on the front called your face. There are these things that stick out below you called your feet, and you go forwards. And actually, you can sort of test it. We don't like going backwards. We hate to forget something and go back to get it. We're very progressive, and there's a lot of problems follow from it, but that's how we work. That's how we've organized, because we stand vertically, and that's how we go. So when you enter that space, you can see in a way how you're attracted, and that's sort of in spite of yourself. And I've really loved watching people come in, and then the head goes up, and then they start to be ensnared or enticed in some way. And that means, I think, the fact that it can do that is just terrific. I think it's it gives me a lot of pleasure. And there's a dynamic in there, which is where the grid, the support grid, which is just a kind of tool, it doesn't trouble me particularly, and I think it reads as a very honorable, honest tool. It's like, well, you want to hang up the books? You better have this thing, which of course is a pretty serious piece of thinking, but it's the way that chatters to the escalator, and there's a little corner which you think is going to touch you in the head, but it won't. Those sorts of things, because I like things that these shelves are made of pieces of timber which are so warped that they're just ridiculous. But I found these pieces of timber in France, and I just thought, oh, how fantastic. So I made shelves which I made brackets which would accommodate shelves which could never carry anything because they're just so warped. And so I'm very drawn to things that are aberrant. So the grid in relation to the building is probably one of my a good surprise.
Oh, that's good. Well, I'll tell you my surprise. If I can brag about this installation, how it's different from the one in Istanbul, which I really was so impressed by, was the use of 2 levels. So we have the ground level, and you look up, but we have the second level, our upper Ephraimson level, where you experience as you walk out of the galleries through the glass doors. And no matter how great we got the digital renderings from my colleague Phil Lynham, our exhibition designer, and got a sense of the floating books from above, when I first went up to see it, it was amazing to see, because when you go and see it, when you experience from the ground, they've installed it so that the books are all level, so you have this real false ceiling. But when you look at from it above, it becomes this topographical landscape of the thicknesses of the books. And that, for me, was this amazing surprise, because I had been seeing your book installations from below, where you have it all flat. And then I saw the Stephen King novel sticking up really high in the back, this red burgundy one, and then these really, really thin ones. And I thought that added a whole other level to what false ceiling is about, because now you're seeing the ceiling from above and this completely different experience. And the secondary surprise was light and the beautiful shadows that get cast from the architectural oval structure of the pavilion. And we were remarking about that with Mike, about these beautiful shadows that create a pathway, which I think you've probably seen one with the little two boys at the end of this, lovely light-filled path. So
Can I just say,
Yeah.
I mean, that just a very obvious point, but probably all we all are is light and topography. Let's all go and live in the very top of Alaska. In 10 years' time, we will be behaving like the Inuit. Perhaps no longer the correct term for people who live nearly on the Arctic Circle. But if you don't have much light and you negotiate ice and snow and you survive, you will invent a culture. So for me, coming here, which I've only been here for 5 days, I mean, this is amazing, this light. I mean, really is incredible to have this quality of light, and you never have that in Northern Europe. And it's not because you're a good place and it's a bad place, but and you can test it, actually. You can go around your collection and you sort of know who got light. You know that Van Gogh went south to get light. He's a Dutchman. And how odd it is that we are perhaps light and topography. How far can you see when you wake up in the morning? Not very far. That's a different mentality from the person who can see a long way. And that goes very deeply into cultural behavior, goes into politics.
with the topography of the books, I wanted to make a quick announcement to you all that when you walk in, you'll see a little activity section for all of our public to enjoy. And we all invite you to study the topography of the books and guess how many books were in the installation. And we're going to do a monthly drawing. And those who win each month will either get a family membership if they already have one, then they'll get a $75 retail card from the bookstore. So we want you to participate. Maybe this is too populist for you, but this is fun. This is audience engagement. We're in the 21st century. And we want you to be able to participate and have fun with it. I did get approval. He did approve this game. So there's a little analog box you can put your guess in, and then if someone out there, some mathematical-minded person's wondering what if 3 people guess the same guess, then we'll pull the winning number out of the hat. So we will not unveil the number of books until the end of the installation. So stay tuned. I just wanted to remind you all that. And now let's just talk about just a few general ideas, and then we're going to end with my quartet of questions that I am starting to ask of every artist that I work with here at the IMA. But just a general question, since you are such an important professor and teaching sculpture, I wanted to ask you how you define what sculpture is, or at least in this day and age when many artists are working in mixed media, right, and not just being a painter and not just being a sculptor or whatever, how would you then define what sculpture is today? Do you see those as two conflicting things, or has your definition of sculpture changed? Because, like, for example, here we have our Heron sculpture students who helped with you, and still we have art programs that divide learning through media. So I want to know whether you had a tension with that. Do you embrace it? Just let's talk about that.
Well, you've asked me to say a lot of things.
I know, so you can just pick whatever you want.
So I'm not having a go. Over the last few days, I've said rather more than I would normally say, or rather, I would normally say it inside my head, and I've said it publicly. So I'm nervous to repeat some things, but it takes an incredibly long time for a human to work out who they are. And even when you've done that, you're not really very secure in it. So being a human is quite anxious, and as it were, adopting a trade. So we've invented all sorts of methods for dividing people up. We invented professions and typologies, classes. You can take different kinds of degree in university. But actually the long haul is much weirder, as people find out. So very often people will study something and not do that at all. But then they will see that there is something in what they did which might be procedural or might be extremely metaphorical, and they will do something in their life, or a series of things in their life. They might have 3 or 4 careers which are in a condition of echoing something they did early on. And there isn't, one of the things in Britain at the moment is that everyone is being told, you just do this and then you'll have a job for life, or then you can just enter the labour pond. And it's a terrible thing to tell young people, and it's simply not true, because humans are much weirder than that. And I think sculpture is very like that. I think sculpture is, it's not music, given some old terms. It's not music, it's not dentistry, it's not architecture, it's not landscape design, it's not civil engineering, it's not the cinema. You can make your own list, but all these things are in culture, and they are all talking to each other. There's friction all the way around, and none of the media stays put. I mean, I think I'm right in saying that the stone axe lasted for 20,000 years, and no one really bothered to change it. I mean, that's 20,000 years. And you're all waiting for your new iPhone. And you don't have any choice, really. It's not because you're particularly vulnerable people. You're living in a moment when that's how it behaves. So there's something to do with content and meaning and value, and these things are very friable. They're not really taught, T-A-U-T. So I think you need some disciplines in schools, but you also need people to be porous and open. And if you see a student who is in a sculpture department and likes growing things, don't smack them and tell them that that's not sculpture. See where that goes. And you have a museum here which is really a botanical garden with painting attached, which is really amazing. I've never been anywhere that offers that. So I would say you play to complexity, but you also play to engagement, and you encourage people. I mean, people are very fearful in the way they adopt up their path, and it's not significantly different from helping a child to walk. You can't do the walking for them, but you can sort of go, well, I'll hold your hand for a minute.
Well, I just think it's intriguing how people, as you're saying, you choose a path and you have a proclivity or a tendency to a certain kind of medium, per se, if you're going to go in the creative field. A little personal tangent on mine is that I took a sculpture class when it was, traditional clay, when I was in grade school, with a group of literally 12 boys. It was me and 12 boys. I know that school. I was 8 years old, Santa Monica, great art school, still there. I was petrified. I don't know why there were no girls in there. It was very gendered at the time. And I made a really ugly sculpture, and I had to imitate making an egg the same size as an egg, and mine was pretty good. And then I took a sculpture.
How big was it?
Oh, I had to imitate the size of an egg.
Egg size.
Egg size,
yeah. That's very difficult, very difficult thing to do.
I don't know whether my mom still has it. She kept the really ugly one.
It's probably hatched.
And then I took sculpture again in high school. And I made a really worse than my 8-year-old sculpture. But as I was taking art classes, because I am a frustrated artist, some of you will be revealed, but I didn't have to make art. It wasn't a necessity. It was something I like to do. And that's when I realized I will become a curator, an art historian versus an artist. And I made a worse sculpture. But as I was taking all my classes, I love 2D. I thrive on drawing, and I like to make jewelry and things, but I don't do well in 3D. And I just find that as a fascinating tendency that people have, and that you like working in real space. I think that's something.
But
that's something,
it's because I'm not a very good draftsman.
Oh, there you go. All right, so I think we will now conclude with my 4 questions, and then we'll leave room for a few questions, and then conclude, and then have our annual meeting. And as some of you have maybe came to the Erwin Worm talk, and then Michelle Grabner talk a few weeks ago. When was it? Yeah, a few weeks ago. I thought it'd be fun to collect the answers of 4 specific questions that I've come up with, so we can get a sense of who the different artists are, and then over a span of time, have really great, interesting answers as a kind of equalizer. I won't explain the provenance of it because you're running out of time, but of where I got this inspiration. I'll do it in another talk. So the first question is, do you have any specific memories of when you first realized you wanted to become an artist? For example, was there a turning point in your life when you made this decision? Memories, turning point?
I think it's just, for me, it was probably the old cliche of the school teacher that you want to be like, because mostly what in England we call going to school is not university. And one of the things could be written over the doors of schools is it should say, "This will help you not be like your parents." Or it could say, "This will help you say goodbye to your parents, because you're going to have to do that. That's God's bad joke. You're going to do it." So I had a ceramics teacher I had a painting teacher and a ceramics teacher, and there's no better way of saying it, they were attractive to me. They were attractive people.
Ceramics and?
A painter.
Painter.
He was, the top guy was a painter, and he was somehow mysterious. I was rather frightened of him. And I think fear's not a bad tool. But the ceramics teacher he's quite celebrated potter called Gordon Baldwin, and I think he'll be in quite a lot of American collections. And he just, like being in a room with somebody who knows how to open the window. It was like he let some air into to quote Loudon Wainwright, my cheesy little life.
Next question. What has been the most important book or essay to influence and shape your thinking about your art? And corollary question. So it's really 4.5 questions. And why?
Whoa. Well, that's like being asked to do a reading list. There's a beautiful book called The Nature and the Art of Workmanship, which, in a funny way, nearly everything I've said is sort of like a bad quote. It's by a man called David Pye, who was who actually you probably ought to have in the collection, was a naval architect and became a furniture designer. Makes very beautiful bowls, and very, I think, very influential upon another British artist of the same generation called Richard Deacon. There's something going on there. But I'm very affected. I'm a man, and I read a lot of. I don't really read fiction. I get told about fiction by my wife, and sometimes I read the things she tells me to read. But I read a lot of history, but I don't really read properly. I don't start at the beginning and finish at the end. And I would actually say that any Eric Hobsbawm books, so Eric Hobsbawm was German Jewish, Austrian Jewish perhaps, out of Berlin, came to London, Marxist. How intelligent. And I really recommend the books. They're just incredible. And you don't have to worry. If you're anxious about politics, forget that. Just read the intelligence. And they're separate subjects. There's one on history of capitalism. There's one on, I think, on industrialization, one on empire. And they just jump about. They're not history books. They just jump about and they make you see the consequences of our actions, and that our actions are always foolish because we're not here for very long and we do what we do, and then somebody else has to mop up after us. But they're he's just unbelievably eloquent. So that's Hobsbawm, Hobsbawm.
Thank you. Third question. What do you believe is the role of art in culture and society today?
Cool.
Give me your best answer.
Well, it's our Red Cross. You know, it's a lot of us don't go to church anymore. We're social beings. We're mysterious. We think we understand everything, but we obviously don't. Imagine if we told everybody they couldn't leave until they'd explained sexuality. You know, we'd never leave here because nobody knows what it is. It's ridiculous. It's beyond us. So we need things that are mysterious and exhilarating and shareable and which somehow contain value. I would say that art ultimately is moral with a little m, because humans are moral. That's quite different from moralizing or being, moralistic. And I think art is it's that for everybody. And it's got absolutely nothing to do with whether you like it. You don't have to like it. It's just there. And that's in song and painting and dance, architecture.
So a little bit of comfort too, even if you don't like it?
I think it's a sort of necessary, it's a sort of dietary requirement. It's not a pill, I think. And when I say you don't have to like it, I don't think that's a useful way to look at art, I think.
Yes, right.
It's there, it's a bit like this Trump thing where he said something he didn't like the look of somebody else. I mean, it's just not your job to go around. I mean, what idiotic, imagine, just put really simply, do I like the way most people I meet look? No. But I only have to hold up a mirror, that probably means they don't like the way I look. So discuss. We need something which allows us to see that we make judgments which are not really very deep, because we're looking to be critically intelligent together. That would make a valuable. Why else would you have things from past cultures and look at them attentively? Because they made that together. That's really amazing that these people did that. Don't fire guns at it and blow it up. And it's not economic value. It's head space.
And last question, keeping in mind Heron students in the audience, do you have any advice for artists just starting out?
I think it's a Jewish thing. I think it's enjoy. Just enjoy. I don't do anything about careerism. I mean, just don't do it. Just don't.
What do you mean by that exactly?
Just don't make cheesy little plans about, be nice to this person, and on this day of the week, that'll this and that happen, and then I'll have a show at the Whitney, and then I'll be in an art magazine. It's much more difficult to make something of consequence that is that moves into a public realm and becomes, I'll say cherished. Cherished is a little bit cheesy, but I mean, cherish is nice. Cherish is, something we care about. And I don't think you can do that by saying, I will make something that everyone is going to cherish. Art isn't really a plan. Art is some kind of extrusion or some sort of... Maybe art's a bit like how we smell. It's not something you can really control. Everybody has a smell. And we don't discuss it because we've spent 50 years pretending we don't smell. And we do. And it's attached to how we feel about each other. And great works of art are like great aromas. And I just think you have to be very... I'm going to shut up, but ambitious is a cousin of the word amble, to go for a walk, and the word ambulance. And they mean to walk. They don't mean to they don't mean to be persistently aggressive and push other people out of the way and be ambitious. They mean to operate spatially and thoughtfully and consider what it is that you're doing. And that is probably best done socially, because if you're near other people who are doing that and you realize that maybe you should tell them they're doing that really badly, or I've thought of another way that you could try, they will do the same for you. And that, of course, is the history of why art... I don't know what Picasso used to say to Braque, but that was a significant relationship, and there's hundreds of them in history, and there are lots in one's daily life, and you stick together, and don't try and think that there is something that you should do because it's there now, because by the time you get there, it'll have passed. So it's obviously stupid. Obvious.
It's good. Well,
that's 4 questions.
Yes.
I'm exhausted.
Yes. Thank you for answering them. So I thought we'd have time for a few questions out there.
Please, no.
No questions? He answered everything. Shell. Yes. She was our volunteer who processed all your books here.
Well, thank you. Well, thank you, because in order for any of those things to happen, you need to set up a very distinct atmosphere. Yeah. Yeah. Well, in a way, what you're saying, I think that's what culture is. Culture is a sort of strange folkloric chatter. It's like, if I look out here, you can see, there are kind of, if you were text, then I think in printing they're called runs, or, there are kind of lines running through the audience which are completely arbitrary but made by the behavior of the audience. And that's a kind of cultural metaphor for how we organize ourselves. And whatever happened that you got that contagious atmosphere going.
And to see all the books, like from the Nancy Drew, the Hardy books from the past, things that related to me in my childhood, that was donated, was so wonderful.
Well, thank you, and to your cult members.
Are there any other questions out there? Yes, in the back.
How did we decide? The same way you decided what to wear to come here tonight. I mean, kind of. You know, how do humans, think about the decisions we make. What? You know, it's just incredible. And every time you make a decision, that means you didn't do 10 other things. That's so, in everything. People you live with, the color of the front door, what you eat, all of it. But I would say that we tried to make something that was culturally, politically, topographically, sociologically, humoristically intelligent. You know that. So there is nobody here who is illiterate, and I would pretty well assume that there is nobody here who, it's a word we're not allowed to use, I don't think there's anyone here who's stupid. And I think we should discuss what that means anyway, because we don't. We just use it as a term of abuse. It usually means you're different from me and I disagree with you. And I think that there's something about encountering the books and you start to hit little rhythms because you're literate and you can't help. You can't not do that. And I think it's partly because you're forced to read text in orientations which are unnatural. And there's something inside your literacy which is a bit belligerent, which goes, oh, bloody read that. And actually reading upside down is very, very demanding. And as you're doing that, I propose that you have a brain science discussion here during the show, because I think there's something very elaborate that goes on with the need to extract meaning from what you're seeing above your head. And actually, almost as soon as you start the process, you become tired. So you can't do it. You can't look at it all. I mean, I think, in a way, we ought to have a Rain Man competition, because there'll be somebody who'll come in here and they will know all the books. This is a superior being, but it's not me. I can't do that. But I think there's something about that demand which is a very unusual, slightly druggy, not that I know anything about that, slightly druggy condition of making meaning. And I think a lot of the decisions that were taken, which are after all rather slow, thread a book, hang a book, place a book, were aware that there were, in art, they're called juxtapositions, that there was some provocative juxtaposition.
One last question. No more questions? One last one, yes.
Oh, where are you? Oh, that's lovely. Yeah, you're younger than me. I don't believe I'm that authority, but I think it's really important to me that I used to met. I beg your pardon? I said you can pretend you are. No, well, I've been pretending for an hour. Sergeant Pepper was playing when I made Henry Moore's. And I really, if I see a Henry Moore, which I made, I always think of Sergeant Pepper. And I think that's a lovely, there's culture for you. You know, Henry wasn't listening to the Beatles, and he probably didn't know I was. And I really, actually, since the subject comes up, I would recommend the Brian Wilson film that's, I'm not sure what it's called, but the Brian Wilson story, which is recently released, which I've seen once with French subtitles and once on a plane last week. And there's a really lovely thing about cultural competition there, where the Beach Boys are discussing the success of Sergeant Pepper. They're talking, and I think that's a really interesting thing if you're young and excited about something, you are competitive, for sure. And you listen to other people, and it gets you going.
So before we close, I wanted to I'll alert you, for those who are young and competitive out there, that on October 29th, we're going to have Michelle Grabner back near the close of her show, and we're going to host something called Masterclass with Michelle Grabner. And as I hope that art students out there have heard from their professors or on our websites or emails, that Elizabeth Smith sent out to all of you, to the professors, that all BA in Fine Arts and MFA and BFA students in the state of Indiana can all apply to be a student on stage. Do Heron students know and other Butler students know about this? Yes? Yes? No? Yes. So make sure you apply if you want to be on stage and have 15, 20 minutes of time with Michelle Grabner. Deadline is September 29th. Go to our website, follow the instructions, and then we'll see who gets chosen on October 29th. And also, since you are a great educator, we will close with talking about, just telling people about this great Academy X book published by Phaidon in the past year, where they asked artists like Richard, Michelle Grabner, and Mark Dyan, who we have up on view upstairs, as well as Walid Beshti, Olafur Eliasson, Wangechi Mutu, John Stezik, so many others, who were all asked to share their lessons about art and life. So I highly recommend that for art students out there, as well as we humans who are, you said, just trying to figure out who we are. So thank you so much, Richard, for helping us understand a little bit more about who we are. It's been an incredible experience, and I want to thank you and your team, and I just want to applaud you, and let's all applaud Richard.
Well, thank you.